Snow kept sifting down as if the sky were busy erasing edges and softening the city into one pale breath. Storefronts bled warm light and horns and brassy carols into the street, and every time a door opened, the world exhaled cinnamon, fried sugar, and the faint metallic note of tinsel. Coats brushed coats, parcels knocked against thighs. Laughter moved in clumps like migrating birds. The wet asphalt shone as dark as a slow river. Tire tracks, sketching silver through slush. Ryder Cole stood in the seam between motion and stillness, with one shoulder against a dented trash can. He let the cold live in his lungs because it made things honest. His leather jacket creaked when he folded his arms. The patch on his back, a hot red shout against the hush of holiday lights. Behind him, the Harley counted itself down in tiny ticks, chrome complaining as it cooled. The sound had always comforted him. Tonight, it only measured how long he had been standing apart from other people. He watched a family through a cafe window across the street until the glass fogged and made them vanish. The child laughed and threw a hand in the air, and a woman leaned forward with a napkin, and a man in a sweater lifted a mug. The fog cleared, and the figures reappeared, as if conjured by heat and steam. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and a stranger went in, taking a gust of snow with him. The restaurant swallowed both. A bus thundered past and shoved a gust up the block, hard enough to rattle the trash can lid against Ryder's elbow. The lid did not fall back into place. It lifted again, shy and testing. He turned his head in the same slow way. He would ease a wrench onto a stubborn bolt. A small hand slid into the gap, the knuckles polished red from coal, the nails rimmed with city gray. Plastic whispered, metal tapped metal. The hand moved with the practiced gentleness of someone who had learned the difference between noise that calls attention and noise that does not. He straightened from the can. The hand withdrew, and a small body folded itself along the far side of the bin where shadow gathered. The hood on her jacket had been pink once, the soft, hopeful shade that belongs to new mittens and party balloons, and now it held the tired chalk tone of a color that has been rinsed too often in too cold water. The jacket was thin and losing the fight. Her jeans were torn in ways that came from wear dote, not fashion. Her fingers shook as if the air itself were shaking her. For a moment, nothing acknowledged them. The crowd poured around the pocket of cold, as if there were a cone of silence over the sidewalk. Ryder realized his hands had gone into fists by themselves. He forced them open and spread his fingers until skin stung and blood woke. The lid lifted again with a careful knuckle. She reached deeper. When she moved, the strap of her backpack slipped and the zipper gaped. He saw it then, tucked at the mouth of that yawning pocket, the color of old rain, a teddy bear with fur rubbed thin to the weave. One ear missing, a scratched plastic eye dulled to a cloudy marble. Near the paw, a little tag hung on a thread, a small rectangle, the white of old paper, the corners soft from thumb and time. The sight hit him in the chest with a bright cold point and held there. He heard all the noises of the two worlds at once, their collision sharp enough to make the air ring, the leather soles of his boots grinding against salt, the chrome whisper of the Harley cooling beside a stretch of wet curb worth more than a month of someone else's rent, the dry rip of flimsy plastic, the almost silent chew of a small jaw working because hunger does not waste sound. Two worlds always existed inches apart. He had lived for years in the seam between them. Tonight the seam sliced. Instead of merely dividing, he stepped off the dry patch where his bike shadow fell and let his weight drag across the crusted snow. The crunch came loud enough to feel like a mistake. She flinched, eyes flicking up, blue, startling and wide, in a face thinned by winter. A cold, quick light ran through them while she measured him. Run or stay, claw or fold. The kind of calculus a child should never have to hold. He lifted his hands the way you lift hands for a nervous dog. But she was no dog, and he corrected himself in the heart. Even as his palms rose into view, she was a person who had been left alone too long. He let her see that he had nothing in his fingers but air. He did not reach again toward the trash can. He did not bend closer. He learned in a single breath to take up less space. The scarf at his throat held its own heat, and the smell of his life, smoke and road and machine oil, he kept it where it was. The child had not chosen him. He let that fact sit. "You okay?" he asked, and even hearing his voice was like hearing a stranger's radio. It came gravel first, then gentled at the edges without losing shape. The words hung just above the scarf and trembled there. He did not try to press them into her. She did not answer him. She lifted a half sandwich from the dark and brushed snow off with quick, careful swipes, as if the moment between finding and eating were a doorway that could close without warning. She bit, she chewed. Her eyes never left his face. She held the food the way you hold a bird that might decide to leave you at any second, the crust biting into her small red fingers. He felt his heart talking inside his chest like something locked in a drawer. He had seen men bleed. He had seen a friend slide across asphalt and leave part of his life on a line of road. He had heard screaming in bars and singing in jails and all the loud, messy sounds of human damage. This quiet sound of a child chewing what was not meant for her, from a place that was not meant for her, replayed a different reel inside him. It did not fit with any of his old pictures. It pushed them aside and made room for a new one, whether he wanted it or not. He kept his eyes low and friendly. He tried to move in a way that would not send her skittering. His jacket made a low leather noise when he knelt, so he would not tower. The cold went through the denim on his knee and parked in the bone with a steady ache. He accepted it. Some things should ache. "You look freezing," he said, and then wanted the words back because of course she looked freezing. The whole street knew that. He changed course and put a smile on his mouth without using his teeth. "Is the scarf helping?" he asked, and then remembered he had not given it. And her hands tightened on the sandwich, and he saw how much she guarded every inch of herself. The decision to do something arrived the way a good line of road flashes under a headlight and opens just enough to let the machine lean through it. He slid his scarf from his neck. The wool was black and soft with use, and it carried what he was: smoke, the sweet ghost of gasoline, a little clean air from the ride, cold and honest. The smell of a world she should never have reason to learn by heart. He lifted it between them so she could see it, and made his movements slow enough to count. "Can I?" he asked. He did not say, "I am giving you something." He was not. He was doing something to change the temperature of a human body who had appeared in front of him. He was choosing to put his warmth on her. She froze in that small way. Bodies know how to freeze when life has taught them that touch is followed by loss. Then a thread of air left her, and her shoulders dropped the smallest distance. She did not say yes. She did not move away. She stayed. He looped the scarf, not ceremonious, not casual. Once around, crossed ends at the hollow of her chest, tucked the edge under the other so the wool would not flap into her face and invite frost to settle. His fingers worked in the practiced, unconscious competence of a life spent fastening straps and cinching gear in bad weather. The scarf looked wrong and right at once on her. It was heavy with the smell of his world, and it was exactly what her throat needed. The heat went into his hands, as much as it must have gone into her. Up close, he saw the yellowed edge of a bruise on her cheek that spoke of furniture or ice or luck. He saw the shiny thread of a run in her hood seam. He saw grime at the corner of her mouth, and the bright little line of snot under her nose, and the way her eyelashes caught snow and melted it into wet black points. She glanced sideways at the gap of her backpack. The teddy's scratched eye stared out at him from its pocket of shadow. The tag twitched when the wind worried it. He felt the name he had not spoken in years press up behind his teeth until his jaw hurt. He swallowed it back like a pill. "What is your name?" he asked, and made the words a soft landing instead of a test. He kept his hands where she could see them resting on his knees. He tried to give the question a wide porch to sit on, so she could come to it or not come. He had rushed too many things already in his life. This he could let arrive on its own. Around them, the audio of two houses kept colliding. The heater in the diner sighed, and someone laughed, and the bell above the door chimed, and a server said 2 coffees and a slice. A delivery truck rattled a thin metal song. A car somewhere squealed and then apologized with a meek 2-note horn. The air tasted of syrup and cigarettes and tin. The snow had grown thicker and quieter, so that every movement seemed to write itself in a notebook that weather kept. She lifted the sandwich again with both hands, and finished the bite she had been working. She tucked the rest back into its wrapper, with the kind of neatness that looks like hope, trying to be practical. She ran one cracked finger under her nose and winced. Her eyes went to the scarf around her neck, and then to his eyes, and then to the mouth of the backpack again, where that small pale tag shifted and flashed like a fish. He watched the tag because he could not watch it. He watched the bear's one ear and the line where a thread had been yanked and snapped. He watched the tag's soft corners sway and steady. He felt cold slide under his jacket, like a reminder that time moves no matter how hard you press your fingers into it. He did not hurry her. He let the city speak again. He made himself small, so her choice would have room. The scarf trapped heat now, and sent a thin thread of steam into the air each time she breathed out. And he could not remember the last time. Watching another person breathe had felt like a kind of prayer. Her lips parted. No sound came yet. He heard his own heart thud, and decided not to be ashamed of that. He leaned forward by the space of a breath, so she would not have to reach as far to be heard. "What is your name?" "Kid," he whispered, and his eyes dropped without his permission to the little white tag bobbing in the mouth of the open backpack, as if the answer might already be written there. Snow kept writing over the city, as if patient hands were repainting every hard line with quiet. The scarf around the girl breathed small ribbons of steam, lifting and fading with each careful inhale. Ryder waited for sound to become a word, and tried not to hurry the moment, because hurry was a kind of harm. He held himself where she could see him, palms open on his knees, the leather of his gloves catching dull light like river stones. Her lips parted and closed again. Hunger took the first answer for itself. He gave it back to her without a fight. The trash lid wobbled against the bin at his elbow, as a passing bus shoved a tired gust through the block. Behind him, the motorcycle gave one last cooling whisper and fell still. For a breath, all he could hear was the little rustle of a wrapper and the brave rhythm of a small jaw doing quiet work. He tried again, gentler, and set the question down as if he were laying a warm cloth on a bruise. "What is your name, kid?" He did not send the words at her. He let them wait where she could come to them if she wished. He kept his open hands in sight, fingers spread, not in surrender, but in proof. She measured his hands, then the scarf, then the open mouth of the backpack. At the edge of that zipper, a pale tag bobbed like a small fish testing a current. His eyes drifted to it as if pulled by a thin wire looped through the middle of his chest. He did not tell his eyes to behave. He let the truth come the way. Truth comes when it is done pretending to be anything else. They do not know he once had a daughter named Lily, about this age. The sentence did not ring the way a bell rings. It laid itself inside him like a sheet of glass, and the whole night took on its sharpness. He did not look around to see who had said it. He knew where it lived. He breathed as if winter itself had put a hand on his sternum and held him steady. The breath went in and stayed, asking to be believed. The girl took one more calculating bite of the salvage sandwich, and then, as if bravery were a rope she could hold for a second, she whispered into the wool around her throat, "Emma." The word stumbled out small and then caught its feet. "Emma, that is a good name," he said, and surprised himself by hearing his own voice without gravel. He meant it. It sounded like a name someone would keep because it fit the life they deserved. A couple passed them wrapped in too much cologne and concern for their own warmth. A child in a red hat looked, and then was tugged along by a mitten. The city kept choosing bright stories and carried them forward. Ryder stood in the dimmer, one that had chosen him and did not move out of its way. "You hungry for something hot, Emma?" he asked, turning his chin a fraction toward the glow across the street. The bell over the cafe door chimed as if it had been listening. The air gave them the smell of syrup and coffee and griddle fat. He did not point. He did not reach. He made a path with words and waited to see whether she would put a foot on it. She held the sandwich a little tighter, and he read what her hands were saying. "Keep that," he said, and meant it like a rule. "You can have hot food as well." He let his eyes flick to the scarf and back. "You keep that too. The scarf is yours while you want it." He set that boundary as if he were closing a gate against wind. She looked at the wool like someone checking a new key in an old door. The scarf had darkened where the heat of her throat met it. It had begun to look as if it belonged to her, not him. She brought one end to her lip and felt it with a thoughtful press before letting it fall again. Then she tucked the sandwich down into the narrow space between bin and paper box, the way a person saves a page when they cannot take the book with them. She hauled the backpack up with an efficient shrug, and the zipper closed enough to keep the teddy's face from catching. The white tag rocked and vanished. Ryder rose slowly so her decision would not have to bear the extra weight of his speed. He offered no hand. He stepped half a pace ahead and turned his shoulder into the wind so it would hit his jacket first. They moved across the street together between a parked van and a blue mailbox. Two small bodies in a wide world, the snow loosening itself from the sky in soft white hours. The cafe door opened at the push of his palm and presented a rectangle of heat. The bell chirped in a voice that belonged to easier winters. Emma crossed the threshold and stopped just inside, as if she needed to take attendance of every new temperature on her skin. She went toward the far booth with small, decisive steps, finding the sort of corner people choose when they are used to being seen too much by the wrong eyes. The waitress looked up from a coffee pot with the gaze of someone who writes stories in her head about the people she feeds. Not to judge them, but to know how to help. She read the leather, the patch, the cold in Ryder's cheeks. She read the thin jacket and the heavy scarf and the small mouth already thinking of steam. She flinched and softened all in one breath. "Pick a booth," she said. She set two menus down that nobody really needed, because the food this moment required was not a question. Ryder slid into the bench across from Emma. The vinyl sighed under coats and thawing. The window fogged and cleared between door chimes. Stainless reflected the world in easy fragments. A constellation made of carafes and stools. A man at the counter ate eggs alone and read the news as if the paper could hold anything together anymore. A couple at a small table shared a banana split with the careful seriousness of children at a ceremony. The waitress came with quick steps and a face that had decided what was right and would just do it. "Hot chocolate, sweetie," she asked Emma, already turning back toward the machine. Emma looked at Ryder, as if she were checking the rules of this world. Hot chocolate, he said. Thanks. And pancakes if you have the batter. The waitress nodded once, almost military. I do. She put a coffee cup in front of Ryder, the way someone places a necessary object where a man can reach it. She glanced at the patch again, not in fear, not anymore, but as if weighing a symbol against a human face. Then she looked at Emma's scarf, too big and perfect, and made her choice. She left the symbol on the table with the sugar and took the human with her. Ryder watched Emma's hands on the tabletop. The skin was split at the creases, the pale lines red as new roads. He did not offer a napkin or a lecture. He waited with his body and tried to make the space between them a place where hunger could live without shame for a while. You keep the scarf until it is summer, he said. She nodded so slightly. The fabric carried the motion for her. The hot chocolate arrived in a chipped mug piled with foam, a little mountain that wobbled and then settled. Emma wrapped both hands around the ceramic and claimed it in a single gesture. The steam fogged her lashes. She blew, tried a sip, blinked, tried again, and then the warmth got inside her and changed the color of her shoulders. The small sound she let go of was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh. It was something older, like a room remembering its own heat. Pancakes came, wide and brave, with a line of butter melting into a gold river and syrup shining as if the plate had caught a streetlight. Emma ate the way people eat when they have learned how to make enough last. She did not bolt. She did not hoard. She made each bite mean what it could. Ryder let his eyes rest on the window where snow wrote the glass, and still he saw her mouth sugar bright, and the way she leaned forward around the plate as if to hide her hunger from the part of the world that wants to judge it. The waitress set a black coffee in front of Ryder that smelled like a hard decision. He did not soften it. He held the heat and drank the bitterness, and let it wake up the places in him he had taught to sleep. He did not ask more questions while the plate emptied itself. Questions were weights, and her hands had been all weights for too long already. He let the room make the noise. A coin spun and fell flat. A spatula slapped a griddle. Somewhere, a child squealed because milkshake straws make excellent swords. The waitress moved quick and kept half an eye on their booth, and each time she passed, adjusted something in her face toward kindness. The Teddy's tag still haunted him from the pocket of his sight. When Emma leaned back for a breath, the backpack pressed against the vinyl, and the little rectangle peaked, the cream paper soft as an old leaf. He kept his hands on his side of the table. He did not reach the little distance toward the thing that wanted to pull him. He felt in his shoulders the exact weight of what it would cost if he touched the past without permission. He let the tag speak to him from where it was, and kept his body still. He paid when the check came, as if the act itself were a ritual. He did not count bills like a man who wants to show he can. He laid down enough and a little more. He slid the receipt toward himself and looked at the simple printed facts as if they were a map. The time, the cash, the small price for a plate that would mean more than that number for a long time. He folded the paper once, then once more, not as a habit but as a vow, and he slid it into a glove. He tucked the glove inside his jacket where the edge of the receipt would sit near the steady knock of his heart. He did not need anyone else to see it. He needed a record he could not argue with tomorrow, when the world tried to tell him that this night had not mattered. Emma pushed her plate away an inch, and then stopped to avoid the sound that plates make when they scrape. She licked a shine of syrup from her knuckle, and looked at him over the proud little mountain of unused napkins. The storm had gone out of her eyes. Weather remained. Safety never comes all at once, but warmth had staked a small claim. "Where is the car?" he asked, keeping the words as plain as a road sign. He put urgency into the emptiness around the question instead of into the question itself. He did not add pity or anger or all the parent thunder that wanted to roll. He asked a thing he could put his feet on. She dropped her gaze and let it climb back up in a single clean motion. "Empty lot," she said. "The closed gas station, a few blocks." She tipped her chin toward the door rather than pointing. "Habit kept certain gestuures in her pocket." Ryder nodded, and the nod closed a circuit inside him. He slipped the glove with the folded receipt deeper into his jacket and felt the paper settle where it would not be lost. He stood, and the booth breathed out. Emma stood too, and tested the new strength in the legs. That warmth had returned to her. The waitress came with a wipe cloth and a look that landed in his face, like a small blessing delivered with rules. He said thank you with his whole mouth. She gave him a bright, hard half nod that said, "Do what is right and do it now." At the door the bell sang its small note, and the cold stepped forward to collect them. The scarf held the air near Emma, sweet and survivable. Ryder let that fact change his own breath. Snow had deepened into the kind that eats sounds and leaves only the scale of things. The street looked rewritten, all opportunity and hazard. He did not take her hand. He moved into the weather first, his jacket a breakwater, and left a space behind him, where a smaller body could travel with less wind. The light of the cafe reached after them, and then gave up. Somewhere close, the motorcycle waited, and would start when called. Somewhere farther, a rusted sedan slept in an empty lot, and in it, a woman breathed too shallow for this kind of night. He felt the thin heat of the mug still on his palms, and understood the cost of every second. Every small, warm breath here was a cold breath there. He lowered his chin and walked the way a man walks, when a road asks for choice rather than speed, and choice answers before fear can say its piece. Snow blurred the street into a slow-moving sheet of white as Ryder stepped out first and let the weather hit his jacket instead of the small body behind him. The cafe bell fell quiet, and the warm air folded back into the room they had left. The scarf held a pocket of heat at Emma's throat and sent a faint ribbon of steam into the night with each careful breath she took. Ryder felt the folded receipt against his chest where he had tucked it, a thin square of proof that mattered to no one but him. A paper oath rustling with his heartbeat. The sidewalk had turned to grit and glassy patches, the kind of surface that teaches a person to place weight like a promise. Emma walked a half-pace behind and a little to the side, the way children learn to walk with men who carry wind for them. She did not reach for his hand, and he did not offer it. She kept one palm on the strap of her backpack and the other near the scarf, as if steadying both warmth and the things that held her small world together. Ryder watched the way she touched each step, as though the ground might change its mind without warning. The city made its louder stories, and the snow softened them until they arrived like memory instead of noise. Friends tried to sing a carol and forgot the middle and laughed at the forgetting. A taxi horn sighed instead of scolding. Neon painted red and green on the wet black street, and the colors drifted when wind moved the melted top skin of the slush. The Harley sat where he had left it, a black animal dusted white and patient. Emma tipped her chin toward the far end of the block without lifting a hand. "That way," she said, "the closed gas station." Ryder nodded and set off at a pace that covered ground without stealing the air from a small chest. He felt the receipt shift with each breath, and let it remind him that he was walking toward the next right thing, not just leaving a warm room for a cold guess. They passed the window where a family had flickered in and out behind fog. The glass was a pale mirror now. He saw himself there for a blink, and then not at all. as if the night had decided he could borrow a reflection only when he needed a reason to enter or to turn away. Emma's reflection stayed longer, a small figure with a large scarf, a bare nose peeking from the mouth of a pack. The little tag at the paw flashed once like a moth wing when her step jolted the zipper. He kept his hands steady at his sides. The urge to look again pressed into him like a bruise, asking to be touched. He let the ache sit. He kept walking. Wind skimmed down a cross street and slid under the seam at his collar like a thin blade. He rolled his shoulders and brought his chin lower, making himself a little broader, the way a man makes his body answer a problem before he speaks. The gas station rose out of the snowfall as a low shadow under a dead canopy. The lot beyond lay open and slick, tire ruts cutting dark veins through the new white. The convenience store's shelves showed through black glass, ghostly rows of things people buy when they do not plan ahead, and then are glad they did. A paper notice hung crooked on the door, too small to read at a distance and easy to understand anyway. Closed. Not tonight. Emma angled toward the lot and paused to glance up at him, asking without words whether his rules matched hers. He nodded once. Keep going. Keep your feet. They stepped into the open, and the wind found them more easily without buildings to break it. The snow lay smoother here, and came up past the edges of his soles to fill the grooves of his boot prints. With a whisper, he placed each step as if laying a plank across thin ice. Emma set her feet into his tracks in a neat pattern, a small path inside a larger one, the two of them riding a shared line across the fresh surface. The sedan waited near the far edge where blacktop gave up and turned to frozen dirt and weeds. It sat under the broken lights like an old tooth with the enamel gone. Rust ringed the wheel wells and had chewed away the rocker panels. The windows had frosted from the inside. Breathing turned to film. Frost feathered the glass where the blowers had failed days ago, and then simply stopped trying. Ryder slowed and lifted his hands while they were still a few steps away, palms open again, not for Emma now, but for whoever looked back through the fogged shape behind the wheel. Emma slipped a half step ahead of him, the way children do when leading someone into a room that has been theirs alone for too long. She put her fingers on the passenger handle with the muscle memory of someone who knows exactly how much stubborn the metal will be. The door stuck and then let go with a sound that was part ice and part hinge. The smell came out first, stale air and damp fabric, and the faint metallic breath of illness. Then the cold moved, and then the sound, a thin, harsh rasp, a woman's chest, trying to turn itself inside out, a little at a time. Emma climbed onto the seat and crouched, her boots finding the dull patches where grime had polished the floor. Ryder leaned into the opening and saw the mother clearly for the first time. She had the color of someone who had been breathing winter from inside a small space for days. A blanket lay over her legs, the cheap kind a person buys from the back shelf, and thanks for its second-hand kindness. Her hair stuck to her forehead in flat, damp strands. Her eyes were bright in that way. A fever makes things bright. She tried to orient herself to the new shape in the doorway, and saw a man in a leather jacket, with a patch that meant danger to people who did not know which sort it was. Ryder kept his body small and his hands open where she could see them. His voice came steady and low. "Ma'am," he said, "you and your little girl are not spending the night here." He did not add words about the holiday or about Grace. He put the sentence down like a plank she could step onto. She coughed once, a sound with dust and apology inside it. When she spoke, the words were thin and still well made. "We will be fine," she said. The way people say it when telling the truth uses energy they do not have. Emma put a hand on her mother's sleeve, and the cough softened, the body trying to spare the child what it could. The girl's fingers tightened on fabric. The scarf slid and caught. The wool, doing what it was built to do. Ryder scanned the interior without moving his head much. The dashboard held no light. The glove box sagged. A small bottle of cough syrup lay in the cup holder at low tide. Its label rubbed pale. A tissue box was empty. A handful of used squares waited in a grocery bag near the floor mat. A long napkin from a pizza place, folded and saved for a reason, stuck from a door pocket. Thin clothes, no heat that would last, winter that did not care. He felt the receipt against his heart, and the mild, absurd comfort of that little square made him hold it harder. He did what he knew. He opened his jacket a fraction, so she could see he did not mean to reach for anything but help. He let the wind speak for a few breaths, so his voice would not. Then he set his words out the way. A mechanic lays tools in a row he can find in the dark. There is a warmer room, he said. There are blankets and hot air and food. You will both go there with me. He heard the way his voice left no room for yes or no. He thought of softening it, and did not. Sometimes the kindest door is the one already open and waiting. The woman looked to Emma the way mothers look to children when the world has tilted, and small hands are the most trustworthy level. Emma nodded a little, and then again with more certainty, as if remembering a plate of pancakes, and a dry scarf, and a voice that had not pressed her when she needed quiet. The woman pulled the blanket tighter, and the fabric shifted to show a bruise where bone rises under skin. Not a new mark, not a thing he would ask about in the cold. A fact to carry and not unpack on the edge of a dark lot. Ryder set one knee in the snow and leaned a little farther in without crowding. He spoke to the center of the dashboard where a badge once said who had made the car. "Ma'am," he said, "I will carry what needs carrying. Emma will ride where she is safest. We will move now." He let the now sit like weight that could not be eased around. He did not raise his voice. He did not lower it to a coo that steals dignity. He left dignity standing and offered it his jacket. Her breath hitched and settled. She looked down at her hands and up again, and then beyond him, at the white world, where streetlights tried to make better shapes. "All right," she said, and made the words stronger than her lung. She moved like someone who has learned to plan each inch of motion for maximum return. Emma slipped the backpack off and then up again, ready to go with the speed of a child who has practiced leaving. The little bear's face peered, and the paw tag swung, and for a moment opened halfway. Ryder saw the cream card, and the softened corner, and the first letters of a name he knew by heart, a trace that looked like the handwriting that had once labeled toy boxes and lunch bags in another life. The sight tapped his sternum like a knuckle. He did not touch. He let the reminder stay where it could do its work. This was not coincidence. It was a mark. He backed out a step and stood, creating a path and letting the stale warmth compare itself to the honest cold outside. He took his jacket wider and let the night in so that the change would not shock them. He turned his body into the wind, a wall that moved as they did. Emma climbed down first with the caution of someone who has learned that doors can close without warning. Ryder reached his hands in a way that meant he would catch, if catching was required, and would not take, if taking was not invited. She landed, and he stepped back to give her room to claim ground with both boots. The scarf slipped. He caught the end and tucked it under itself where it would hold. She did not thank him with word. She lifted the backpack higher and lifted her chin, and that was answer enough. The woman swung her legs with the grit of winter in every inch. Ryder brought his hands close without taking hold, offering support that could be accepted without the insult of being lifted. When she shifted weight, he moved with her. So gravity met more than bone and wool. They reached upright with a small sound, no one named. She set both palms on the cold roof for a breath, then nodded that she was ready. They crossed the lot in a short file, Emma first by instinct, and then beside her mother when the wind pushed. Ryder walked a half-step to the outside, his broader shoulder turning a gust into a lesser gust. The snow started falling heavier, flakes large enough to catch on eyelashes and tug like tiny weights. The world sounded like a room after a door closes softly. He could hear his own breath, and the louder breath of the woman, and the faint thread of Emma's breath under the scarf. He told his legs to make the distance feel short, no matter what the ground decided to argue. The street met them like a threshold. The sidewalk took their weight. The Harley waited under its lace of white. Ryder wiped the seat with his forearm, and the snow slid off in a sheet that shattered against the curb into soft glitter. He ran an inventory through his head at a speed that felt like prayer. He could take them both, without asking a soul if he made 2 trips. He could take them both now, if he used another vehicle from another life. He chose now. There would be no second walk across a field of cold air. He turned to the woman and set the next piece in place. There is a room close enough that it will feel like it belongs to you before your hands go cold again. He said, blankets, heat, food. You do not owe an apology. His urgency wore a coat of steady. He added one last line in a tone that made it fact. We are going now. The receipt pressed against his heart like a seal. The small white tag in Emma's pack tugged at him from the near future. He did not reach for either. He reached for responsibility, and for speed that would not drop anything fragile. He took his helmet by the strap and did not put it on. He looked down the street and found the open line through the falling white. He set his jaw and learned a new shape for his face under the snow, a shape with room for both weight and gentleness. He stepped forward so the wind hit him first and left a softer air behind where a small girl and a tired mother could move. The scarf kept doing its quiet work. The bear watched with its clouded eye from the notch of the zipper. The city rearranged itself around the decision he had made with the quiet clicks of a machine that had finally found the track it was meant to run. He felt each click along his spine. He did not say a word about redemption because words could wait. He would let a heater and blankets and a room talk first. He took the first stride with his shoulders broad and his hands ready, and the night narrowed into a path he could carry them through. Snow kept falling in slow, patient sheets as Ryder took the wind first and let it break across his jacket, leaving a quieter corridor for the girl and her mother. The city's bright talk thinned to a working hush on the side street, where the clubhouse sat behind a tired roll-up door. The brick held winter, the way brick always does, stern and loyal, but a seam of warmth slipped out at the sill and told him the space heater inside was a lie. He gave the metal 2 knocks in the old cadence. A slit slid open, and a pair of eyes measured the dark, measuring the small figure with the oversized scarf. The woman behind her. Ryder kept his voice level and even open. His breath smoked in the thin stripe of light. The bolts thudded back. The door climbed with a long groan, and heat rolled out shyly with the smell of oil and old coffee. A single guitar string hummed somewhere, a stubborn note hanging in the air. Ryder stepped through, and then stepped aside so the girl and her mother could cross the threshold without touching a thing they did not want to touch. The door came down behind them and sliced the weather away. Heads lifted, leather thawed to a dull shine under the overhead bulbs. Wary eyes took stock and narrowed, not unfriendly, not yet friendly, but ready to decide. Ryder did not bother with a speech. He turned so the room could see what he had brought in from the night, the scarfed child, and the woman with winter in her lungs. He spoke the truth the way you put a tool on a table for work, plain and sufficient. She is sick. The kid needs heat and food. We are not leaving them in a car. Silence lasted the length of one deep breath. Then one man stood, another followed. The first lifted a stack of army blankets and shook them open so they smacked the air like flags rejoining it. The second dragged a squat heater by its dented handle and clacked the plug into a strip, already crowded with claims. The cord slapped the concrete and coiled like a black snake coming to rest. Someone cleared the big table under the front window, sweeping sockets and rags into a crate without fuss. No one asked where or why. Men read pictures and took orders that had not been spoken. Ryder let a little weight run off his shoulders. He guided the girl and her mother to the far corner where heat would pool and stay. He pointed, did not press, and let them choose between a patched sofa and a heavy chair. With a torn arm, the woman took the chair, her body surrendering to it like a soldier to a decent bed. The girl perched beside her, small and still, the scarf, a dark loop that hid the hard work of breath. The heater coughed, a small iron dragon clearing its throat, then settled into a low, steady hum. Warmth sketched itself across the concrete, like a brush dipped in air. The room gave up a sound, not quite a sigh, and not quite a prayer, only a soft release. Survivable, the air said, for now, yes. Ryder hauled a low crate over and set it between chair and sofa to serve as a table. He took off his gloves and slid the folded receipt from the inside of his jacket and set it under one glove like a pressed leaf. He did not need any man here to know what it was. He needed to know it would not drift away from him. The small square looked bare and official on rough wood. The girl watched it the way children watch tiny papers that decide big days. At the slop sink, a kettle drank until it moaned. On the hot plate, a dented pot took cinnamon and began to release a brown promise into the room. Another man rooted in a storage bin and came up with a sack of old toys kept from some other winter when a cousin visited and hope was simpler. No one bragged. Hands moved. The room rearranged itself around a need and found a shape that held. Ryder flicked his eyes toward a draft that drew a thin line of frost along the baseboard. A brother saw the look, nodded, and hauled a roll of clear plastic and a staple gun from a shelf. He and another man unrolled and lifted and sealed a bright new window inside the old one. The click of staples, a quick language of care. Tape whispered, plastic tightened, condensation blinked to life and began to blur the cold away. Faces Ryder knew moved in and out of the little jobs. Men he had ridden with through noise and quiet. Men he had forgiven and been forgiven by in the rough dialect of this place. The emblem on his back had started fights and finished some. And tonight, it was a banner above ordinary kindness that no one demanded and no one would record. He felt the old gear inside him, the one that had ground and stuck for years, catch and turn clean for once. The girl unzipped her pack with careful fingers, never taking her gaze off the room. She did not offer anything to anyone. She rearranged what was hers. The bear's clouded eye peered out, and the little cream tag swung and flashed and went still. Ryder noted its place by instinct, the way a mechanic knows a socket by reach without looking. It did not own him. It pointed, he let it point. Another man strung lights along a beam. Half the bulbs woke at once, and half pretended to sleep. With a twist and a murmur, 3 more decided to help. A dull, low carnival glow drew its line through the room. Someone wrestled a crooked plastic tree from the cage and mounted it on a flatter block so it would stand with dignity. The girl watched the small ceremony of competence with her mouth parted the smallest measure, as if air had turned more usable. The kettle began to quiver. Steam curled from the pot. A chipped mug appeared by Ryder's hand, and the man who brought it gave a quick nod that said no need to speak. Ryder passed the mug to the girl and waited for both her hands to claim it before he let go. The mother's color crept back to the ridge of her cheekbone. Her eyes moved around the space, naming things, pulling language back over them like blankets. Heater, blanket, mug, chair, men, tree. The word room landed last and stayed. Ryder walked to the front window bench and thumped the face of the wall clock with two knuckles. The second hand, grudging and stubborn, stumbled and then chose to travel. He marked the time in his head. When he sat again, he set the clock where he could see it from the crate. Receipt, clock, heat, child, mother. Line the facts up and live in them. This was how you build a truth, solid enough to bear more weight. A guitar found a pair of hands. A thumb dragged across strings and made something not yet a song. Then another note arrived and stood beside the first. The voice that followed forgot a verse and found another. And no one minded because the point was not accuracy. The point was joining. Men who love the fight sometimes forget how to do this. And then remember, in a room like this one, in winter, the girl sipped and looked at the rim where her mouth had left a pale crescent in the foam. She set the mug down on the crate exactly where space had been cleared for it and drew her knees under the scarf, making a little nest in plain view. The bear faced the room. The tag slept and woke and slept in tiny swings. The mother nudged the blanket with her foot, found a spot of warmth that belonged to no one, and borrowed it. Ryder checked the heater's tilt and nudged it, so the fan faced the corner without scorching the wall. He felt for whispers of air with the back of his hand and stuffed a bandana into a slit that sang too much. He stacked two more blankets within easy reach. In a bin, he found a pair of clean socks that had somehow escaped becoming rags, and tucked them under the edge of the blanket like a secret that would be discovered at the right moment. He sat on the floor with his back against a pillar, because sitting lower than the people you care for tells the body the truth about the job. He did not want to tower, he wanted to frame what mattered. His heartbeat thudded against the folded paper in his jacket and steadied into the hum of the heater like a machine sinking to a better rhythm. The wind tested the door and gave up. Men who had been standing sat. A box of crackers slid along the table and stopped by the crate, as if it knew the way. A jar of peanut butter arrived with a lid stretched past courtesy. A spoon carved a thick line and laid it on a paper towel with a surgeon's care. No one asked for a plate. The sandwich went down near the mug. The girl looked to Ryder with a small question. He nodded once. She took a bite and chewed with the rare concentration joy requires when it finally appears. The room warmed in the second way, the one that has nothing to do with air and everything to do with the arrangement of trust. Suspicion walked out a side door. Action took its chair. Concern stayed, but sat like a dog at a gate instead of a wolf ready to test its teeth. Ryder stretched his legs and let the ache prove he had spent himself on something worth its price. His gaze went back to the bear, to the tag seeded into his night like a white hook, designed to catch only the softest tissue. He did not fight the tug. He did not follow it yet. Fate is a word people use when they do not want full credit for choice. He had chosen. He would keep choosing. The heater hiccuped and found a steadier breath. Bulbs along the beam brightened the smallest degree, as if they had learned how the night wanted to be lit. A low song gathered its shape. A man laughed into his sleeve when he misplaced a line, and the sound folded easily into the room. The girl reached into the small pocket of her pack and drew out a foil star she had folded from candy paper. She turned it, watched the light run along the creases, then stood on the sofa cushion and hung it on a low branch of the crooked tree. It trembled, and then held. The room saw her do it, and decided that this was the right order of things. Ryder checked his glove and the folded receipt and the clock's steady second hand. He looked at the tree and the imperfect star and at the way light chose it anyway. He rose and pulled a roll of butcher paper and a ball of twine from the cage and set them on the crate. From a box he chose a small toy with its corners, bruised by other hands, and wrapped it with the simple care of a person doing a job without commentary. He tied the twine, set the parcel where a small hand would find it in the morning, and wrote nothing on it. The night would know its owner. The corner bulb that had resisted all evening finally caught under the coaxing of a thumb flick and a patient grin. Light filled the last shadow in the room. The girl had stopped shaking. The mother's hands were idle in the best way. With nothing left for them to hold up, Ryder met the girl's eyes. "Good," he said, in the voice men use when an engine finally turns over, half relief and half resolve. She nodded back with the sober authority of a child who knows how close the world came to failing and chooses to accept this win without wasting it on too much smile. Outside, the night kept laying white over everything. In here, air and action and low voices made a different weather. Ryder looked once more at the crate where his glove covered the proof he had chosen to keep, at the clock, at the small tree with its bent star. He stood with his back to the pillar and let a truth settle in him that he had refused for years. That warmth given without bargain pays a debt no other currency has reached. The heater hummed like a heart that had decided on a pace and meant to keep it. The room listened and matched it. And for the first time since a child lifted a trash lid in the snow, the night seemed willing to let them keep what they had made. Quiet settled across the room, the way warm breath settles across cold glass, slow and certain until the pain clears. Ryder stayed on the floor with his back to the pillar and let the ache in his shoulders speak plainly. The heater held to its low humming like a heart that had picked a tempo and meant to keep it. String lights along the beam glowed in uneven patience, a crooked constellation doing its best. He did not look at the door again. Men had taken their chairs. Work had found its level. Outside, snow kept laying itself over the city. In here, cinnamon and old coffee and warmed dust made an honest air. Ryder breathed that mix and felt it anchor him to a present that was finally not trying to slip away. Across from him, Emma tucked her knees under the scarf and made a small hill that rose and fell with measured effort. Her hands cupped the cooling mug the way small hands cup a wild thing, firm enough to keep it, soft enough not to startle it. The bear watched from the mouth of the backpack with its clouded eye. The pale tag at the paw swung, settled, and swung again, undecided, as a thought that did not yet want a name. Emma's mother had found an angle in the chair that let her chest work easier. Each breath no longer sounded like a contest. It sounded like a plan. Ryder stood and listened with his palms on his thighs the way a man listens to an engine, not to decide whether it lives or dies, but to decide what it needs next. A hairline draft hissed along the base of the bay door. He walked the seam with the back of his hand and felt winter writing itself in a thin line. From a bin, he stripped an old inner tube and stapled it along the bottom edge. Each staple was a small, bright answer. The hiss softened. The room kept its heat, the way a good story keeps its spine. He returned to the crate. His glove lay where he had placed it, still covering the folded receipt. The wall clock ticked with shy confidence. Condensation filmed the plastic window they had just sealed and made a soft blur of the night beyond. He slid Emma's mug an inch so no ring would bleed into the paper, then set the glove back, as if he were laying a flat hand over a restless rattle. He did not need to read the numbers again. He needed the proof to stay put. From the cage, he pulled tape, a pouch of nails, and a hammer blackened by years of grease. In the corner, two boards refused to meet. He set a shim, tapped it with quiet strikes until the gap closed its mouth. He taped the seam and wiped the dust on his jeans. The heater's hum climbed into the new stillness, as if it had been waiting for the room to earn it. Emma watched him with the careful attention children reserve for weather that might be trusted. Ryder lifted the roll of tape an inch in a small show and held it as though it were a rabbit pulled from an empty hand. She allowed a narrow smile, stingy with joy but willing to let some out. He answered with a slight tilt of his chin and went on with the work, because repetition is its own comfort, and sometimes the only kind a person can accept. The guitar found more of a tune. A voice followed, carrying bits of carols without caring whether the pieces fit. Laughter rose and folded itself away again, not to bruise the quiet. Cups knocked softly on crate wood. Blankets rasped against sleeves. Every small sound added up to something larger than itself. At the tree, he set a crate of mixed things on the floor and began to sort, not to tidy for pride, but to turn a scatter into a shape that could serve twine, a pencil no longer than a finger joint, butcher paper with old creases, an envelope of blank tags meant for shipments that had never left. He thumbed one tag, thick paper, cream colored, a clean punched hole, the faint smell of glue. He held it like a small tool whose purpose had yet to be spoken out loud. He set the tag on the crate without looking at Emma or the bear and laid the pencil beside it. From the box of toys he chose carefully, not by shine but by feel. A little truck with a bent axle that still rolled true enough to carry a hand around a room. A board book with thick pages that could forgive clumsy fingers. At the bottom he found a soft shape crushed under hard edges. He freed it. A small teddy, newer than the one in Emma's pack. Both ears intact, fur still holding its nap. Not perfect. One eye bore a comet scratch. The back seam had been mended once already with patient thread. He set the bear on his knee and smoothed the fur with the flat of his palm, as if proving to his own skin that it would be gentle enough. He wrapped the truck first, because hands know what to do with paper and string when the mind is not ready to speak. He folded neat corners, tied a snug square knot, and slid the parcel under the crooked tree where the light could find it. He wrapped the book second, crisp and careful. He left the small bear unwrapped on the crate, where lamplight might tell the truth of it without ceremony. The blank tag waited beside it like a quiet future. Emma watched the unwrapped bear with a held stillness, balanced between want and the rule learned from the world that wanting is dangerous. Ryder did not reach for the tag. He let the picture sit in the air, a soft animal and a small rectangle of paper, and trusted that the room would remember what it meant. He scanned a shelf and found a roll of paper towels with some patience left. He folded 3 squares, dipped a corner in warm water, and carried it back as if delivering a tool, not a favor. A thin, amber arc of syrup gleamed at the corner of Emma's mouth. He offered the square without touching her. She considered, took it, and wiped the spot with brisk pride, the way a person sweeps her own floor. The tremor that had held in his chest unknotted by a measure. He did not try to tie it back. At the chair, the mother braced both hands on the blanket and drew a slow breath through her nose until her ribs made space. He watched the cost and the way she paid it without show. On a shelf, someone had set the cough syrup. On another, a nest of clean cups waited. He poured warm water, not hot, not cold, and set it on the crate within her reach, the same way he had offered the cloth. A tool, not pity. She drank, nodded a quiet thanks, and set the cup down with the caution of someone who has learned not to let small good things fall. The heater hiccuped and then steadied. A man at the power strip shifted a plug, and offered a wry smile to the old joke of wires and need. He thumped the case once with the heel of his hand. The sound went through the floor and came back as warmth. The foil star on the bent plastic tree twitched and settled. Emma traced a fingertip along the twine on the wrapped truck, like a child petting a docile dog. She glanced at Ryder, then at the unwrapped bear, and looked away. The blank tag tugged at him from the edge of his sight like a white hook. He kept his hand flat on the crate. Choice, he told himself, not fate. You choose. He fetched a small toolkit that had once lived under a seat and turned his care to the room itself. He fixed the torn arm of the chair so the foam would not show its bone. He tightened the hinge on the storage cage. He wedged the wobble out of a table with folded cardboard. Each click and turn and tap was a sentence the space understood. We stay, we repair, we keep. The guitar settled into a line someone could hum, and someone did. A man who never sang found a note and held it, surprised by his own throat. A second laugh showed teeth, and then hid inside a sleeve. The sound stitched to the heater's hum and made a new fabric. Emma let go of the mug without looking to see whether someone would take it. The way her shoulders lowered marked the exact spot where fear stopped spending her air. Ryder reached into a drawer for a pen and tested it against his palm, a thin blue line proving itself. He set the pen beside the blank tag and then closed his hand. He would not write with the room watching his face. He went to the sink, rinsed the damp square, and hung it to dry on the edge. A small ritual that meant nothing and everything. When he returned, Emma had tipped her head back against the sofa, her neck cushioned by the scarf. The mug sat empty, a brown ring, drying at the rim, like a quiet moon. She blinked, the slow blink of a person learning that sleep is allowed. The cough in the corner had taken a step backward. The cracked bulb held steady light without being convinced again. Ryder pulled from the cage a thin mattress that had seen a dozen emergencies. No one ever told stories about. He laid it beside the sofa and shook a blanket over it until it held air. He rolled a sweatshirt and tucked it under one end for a pillow, then placed another folded blanket within easy reach for a hand that might need it before a brain could fully wake. He stood back and surveyed it with the same care he would give a machine he planned to trust. He adjusted a corner and nodded once. He crouched beside Emma and tapped the mattress with 2 fingers. Not a command, only an invitation. Her gaze dropped and rose again. She measured the space like a fox measuring a new den. Then she slid down from the sofa without surrendering the scarf and folded herself onto her side with a caution that would have broken him yesterday. Tonight it stitched him steadier. He draped the extra blanket to her shoulder and left the edge loose so she could push it down if heat arrived too fast. He looked to the mother. She shook her head at the idea of trading the chair and softened the refusal with a look that said this seat was better than the world had offered in a long while. He respected the boarder and stepped back to his place at the pillar. The room thinned its words. Boots scuffed quietly. A spoon kissed tin once and learned silence. The heater kept the time. The string lights ticked as heat found them. The star held to its small, bright duty. Ryder sat again with his spine to the pillar and set his palm over the glove and the folded receipt. He felt the square under leather as if paper could carry a pulse. The clock ticked in even steps, a proof the mind could trust without asking for grace. He matched his breath to both and let his ribs learn the rhythm. He picked up the pen without looking and palmed the blank tag, as if warming it. He did not write a lost name. He turned the tag and wrote 3 modest words on the back where an eye would not find them first. For Emma, tomorrow. No sender, no bust, only a small promise pointed forward. He threaded twine through the hole and tied a loose loop leaving room for the tug of a small hand. He set the tag by the soft new bear and turned the bear so it faced the little bed. Then he heard it, the smallest sound, the kind of sound that gets erased in loud cities and is kept only in rooms that have earned it. Not a laugh, not a cry, Emma's breath catching on the edge of a dream that did not begin as fear. He closed his eyes once, opened them, and let that fact stand like a lit candle inside him. He looked at the emblem on the wall, and the crooked tree, and the imperfect star, and the heater that had decided to continue. He accepted that the night was holding. He would be the last tall thing in the picture while smaller bodies slept. He would keep the line between their warmth and the door. He would keep the facts where he could see them if doubt tried to wear the old face and walk in. Outside, Snow kept practicing the slow work of forgiveness. Inside, tape and twine and paper and breath had made a weather that did not belong to chance. Ryder leaned his head against the pillar and listened to the heater, and the clock argue softly about tempo. Between those two machine songs, he listened for Emma's steadier breath. His hand rested over the glove, feeling the receipt beneath as a steady square of truth. He let that truth lie with him. He let the hour thin to a quiet thread and hold. Morning entered the room the slow way, through seams and scuffed panes, a thin gray light that deepened the glow of the heater by contrast. The string lights along the beam retired one by one into a tired shimmer. The wall clock kept counting in small, brave steps. Somewhere in back, an old coffee maker remembered its job and clicked awake, sending out the first bitter breath of the day. Ryder had not slept so much as set his weight down in pieces and let the pillar hold what it could. He kept one ear on the heater and one on the door, and learned the quiet between them by heart. When the temperature of the room changed in that invisible way, that means the night has given up. He lifted his head, rolled stiffness out of his shoulders, and found every ache exactly where he had left it. Under his glove, the folded receipt held its neat square against the crate, a small fact he could touch before he stood. Emma lay on her side in the small bed he had made. The scarf gathered at her throat like a kept promise. Her hair lifted and fell in the same even rhythm, the kind of breathing children do only when a room has decided to keep them. In the torn chair, the mother had slept with her eyes half open, the way people learn to sleep when they trust someone else to take the watch. She saw Ryder move and gave him a small, tired nod that meant, "Go on." He went first to the heater and held his palm above the vent, feeling the hum loosen and settle. He checked the clear plastic they had stapled over the window and found a lace of condensation, proof the warmth had held its ground. He pressed the new rubber seal along the bay door with the tip of his boot and felt it give and spring back. Each small survival stood up in a row, like tools laid out for a job not yet finished. On the crate, the glove still covered the receipt. Beside it sat the blank tag he had marked on the back and the small new bear facing the bed as if it understood its duty. He did not touch them yet. He lifted the kettle to the hot plate and set 3 cups within reach. Water began its quiet talk. Behind him, boots scuffed as 2 brothers came awake without drama. One folded a blanket into a tight square. One tapped a fuse box and offered the panel a private joke. At the hot plate, a dented pan sighed and took a handful of oats and a pinch of salt. The room accepted the smell with relief. Breakfast is proof that a day plans to continue. The mother cleared her throat. Less fight in the sound than last night. More work. Ryder poured warm water and brought it. She took the cup with both hands and wrapped her fingers around the heat like she was greeting a small animal that had chosen her. "Thank you," she said, a rasp that was present and proud. He nodded once and set a second cup on the crate for later. Emma stirred. then went still the way sleepers do when they are deciding whether to trust the morning. Ryder crouched and watched as if reading a gauge. A dream moved under her eyelids and left no mark. She exhaled, and her breath caught on a small sound that was not fear. Heat slid through him at that. He looked at the little bear on the crate and turned the tag he had written on the back. For Emma, tomorrow. Tomorrow had arrived while he held the watch. He set the tag face up on his palm and held the pen without dropping it. He did not want to write over a ghost. He wanted to write to the girl breathing in this room. The kettle chattered. The clock ticked. The heater breathed. He knew the name he would not invite. He would not write Lily. He would not take comfort by dressing a past loss in a present shape. He bent and wrote with a steady hand, "To Emma, with love." He tied the tag to the bear's wrist with a loose loop a child could free, and set the bear near the foot of the little bed. Not so close it would startle, not so far it would feel like a test. Coffee was ready. He cut it with water and drank. It tasted like a long road and a small victory. He poured a second and set it by the mother. She breathed the steam before she drank, and for a moment her eyes closed in a private conversation with warmth. Color tucked into her cheekbone and stayed. Emma opened her eyes to a light that did not demand, only offered. She mapped the room the way you check a landscape after a storm. Beam, bulbs, heater, tree, man. She saw the bear last. Her eyes went to the tag and then to Ryder and then away again. He said nothing. He backed off an inch and let the moment be larger than he was. The heater hummed. The oats thickened. The clock kept on. She pushed the blanket to her knees and slid a hand along the scarf, as if confirming the rules still held. Her fingers hovered over the bear and then settled, palm to fur, a quiet claim. She tipped the tag and read it with her head tilted, like a person taking in a recipe she means to try. She did not look for a second line. She did not ask who loved her. She looked at Ryder and found that answer in the room. Her mouth lifted at one corner and then forgot to stop. The first real smile arrived, small and sure, like something that had crossed a winter field without losing its heat. "Good," Ryder said, and heard the word in his mouth the way a mechanic hears an engine catch. He set his hand on the crate, not on her shoulder, and left the space where dignity breathes. A brother set bowls down and ladled oats with the quiet generosity that grows out of scarcity. Another slid a plate of bread browned in a pan and dusted with cinnamon that had no reason to be here, except that men become different men when a child sleeps in their rooms. The plate landed with a soft thump that sounded like a promise kept before spoken. Ryder passed a bowl to the mother and waited until her grip settled. He set one on the crate for Emma with the spoon on the far side, so she would have to reach like choosing. She blew across the top and watched the steam flatten, then fall back. The first bite came cautious, the second sure, the third carried a small hum in her throat. She might have blushed at if she had heard it. Ryder drank coffee and let that sound lodge under his ribs, like a nail joining two boards that should have touched all along. Wind rattled the door, and the room did not flinch. The plastic star trembled and steadied. A guitar found a clean chord and let it ring without building anything on it yet. There is music that happens before music, and it tells a truth. Emma wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and Ryder set a small square of paper towel within range. She took it and used it and set it down with care, as if not to make the crate sticky. She set the new bear in her lap and lifted the old one beside it, the one with the clouded eye. The pale paw tag swung and stopped half open toward the light. Ryder saw the line he knew was there. "To Lily, with love." The room narrowed for a breath. Sound carried on, and still the letters spoke louder than heat and coffee and clock. They were a neat hand that might have belonged to a careful father. The old door inside him pressed to open. He kept his face plain and present and did not move. Emma smoothed the worn fur with the same palm that now knew new softness. If she noticed that he had read the old tag, she gave him the gift of letting it pass without comment. The mother met his eyes for a moment, held them, and let them go with a quiet grace that said, "Not now." He accepted the mercy. He turned the new bear's wrist so the twine lay easy. He fixed a small lift in the chair seam so the fabric would not catch when someone stood. He rinsed bowls and set them where light could warm them dry. This was the hour for the line he had been walking toward without knowing when his feet began. He went to the pillar and set his palm there the way some men pray without saying the word. He pictured heat and blankets and breakfast and knew none of those were the thing. The thing was the sentence he would live with. He turned to the mother and spoke in the tone he saved for jobs that happen no matter what fear says. "We will take you to a clinic," he said. "You will get looked at proper. After that, you will not be sleeping in that car again." He did not dress it in hope. He said it like weather. Here tonight, tomorrow, as long as it takes. He let the words sit in the space between them with a weight he did not intend to set down. He was not offering a favor. He was naming a change. She searched his face for the price. He was not saying he had already paid it in smaller coins across long years. She swallowed and nodded once, conceding need and keeping dignity. "Thank you," she said, fierce in a thin voice. Emma tied the bear's tag into a different knot, clumsy and perfect, a child knot, a future knot. Men who had been pretending not to listen put their relief down on the table like tools. One said the van had gas. One said he knew a nurse who would open a back door without questions. One pointed out the jacket with the best pockets. Work runs downhill once someone tips it in the right direction. Ryder lifted his glove. The receipt lay where he had left it. He did not need to see it. He slid it into his jacket against his heart. The square felt less like record and more like seal. He tugged the zipper up and fastened the day around him. The room shifted a hair toward movement. Bowls stacked. The guitar set itself down like a cat. The heater kept the air honest. Ryder crouched by the small bed and touched the edge of the blanket with 2 fingers, as if tuning a map to north. "Keep the scarf," he said. Emma nodded as if she had been expecting orders and had already agreed. He offered a hand to the mother, not to haul her, only to be there should gravity test her. She took it. His other hand steadied the chair more than it steadied her. She stood with a long breath, and for the first time the cough did not arrive. The moment she rose, that felt like a gift worth wrapping. The door would open and the day would be there with clinics and forms and medicine and calls. He felt all of it line up like traffic and did not flinch. He had made the larger choice. He had written it in warmth and bowls and tape, and in one plain line he had become rather than spoken. Emma would not be another Lily. He did not think it. He embodied it in the way he moved, and in the care of his hands and the road he pointed at. He looked once more at the crooked tree and its foil star, and at the small gifts gathered like shy animals, and at the clock that kept a second hand only because someone had tapped truth back into it. Morning was not a miracle. Morning was work that had chosen kindness and kept choosing through the dark. He set his hand to the bolt, felt the cold bite, and lifted. Light ran thin across the threshold. He stepped into it first, so it would break on him, and left a quiet corridor behind so smaller bodies could pass. Snow thinned to a quiet lace on the air as morning settled its weight across the clubhouse. The roll-up door had been lowered again, the bolts sure in their beds, the rubber lip pressed true against concrete. Inside, warmth had learned the room and kept it. The heater hummed in a low, patient register. The string of lights along the beam dimmed to a soft choir. Nothing showy, Only a handful of small voices holding their note. The wall clock ticked with clean intention. Ryder stood a long breath beneath all of it, and let the scene print itself on him the way ink pulls into good paper. Emma slept on the thin mattress he had shaped for her, the scarf cupped at her throat like a promise that had lived through the night and did not need anyone to defend it now. One arm held the new bear, the tag tucked under its paw, as if the words wanted to rest too. The other arm had drifted toward the old bear, which kept its clouded eye toward the heater with the stubborn habit of old things that still know how to be useful. Emma's mother slept on the cot a few feet away, her breath even and ordinary at last, the blanket riding her chest in a steady tide. Between their two rhythms the room found its pace and kept it. Ryder leaned his shoulder to the pillar and catalogued the small sounds that made this safety real. The tick of the clock was a firm little footfall, neither rushed nor lazy. The heater laid out a continuous line like a road that did not ask for directions. The occasional click in the beam above the tree sounded like a throat clearing before a promise. A cup settled into the crate with the quiet weight of something finished and something beginning. He listened until every piece of the room had introduced itself and taken a seat. He crossed to the storage cage and pulled down a pad of thick paper and a pencil worn down to the stubborn stage. He set both on the crate, where the glove still covered the folded receipt, the way a flat hand covers a rattle. A month ago, a year ago, another life ago, his ledgers had been tallied in noise and motion, in miles and mistakes and short victories that always wanted a louder brother. This page wanted something else. He drew a short line at the top and wrote the date in words, not because words were prettier, but because numbers had done their share of telling him what to do. Then he made the simplest ledger he knew how to keep. One warm room, one working heater, one child sleeping without fear, one mother breathing easier. He read the lines once aloud in his head, not to make a prayer of them, but to make them hold like studs behind sheetrock. He did not write a balance, or a cost, or a due. He spread his palm over the words, broad and scarred, and pressed until he felt the slight give of paper into wood, as if he could convince the crate to remember too. When he lifted his hand, the page stayed open and quiet on the grain. He turned his wrist, and the leather of his jacket pulled a little, and reminded him that something lay against his chest where it had spent the night. He reached inside and touched the crease of the receipt with his fingertip, a square fact softened by warmth, changed in no way by sentiment, changed in every way by use. He did not need to read the line on it. He knew what it said. He knew what it meant. Not triumph, not absolution, a seal, a small truth pressed into paper and kept near the heart, because a man sometimes needs to carry proof even when the room is already believing. He moved through the space as you move through a shop that has finally accepted what job it is meant to do. He checked the plastic window where they had stapled the sheet tight. Condensation purled there, proof of exchange, proof of difference, proof of the border between out and in. He thumbed the inner tube he had nailed to the bay door and felt it spring cleanly back into place. He tested the lamp beside the cot with the edge of a nail and let the switch answer in a small, obedient click. He slid the crate an inch closer, so a sleeping hand could set a cup down without waking more of the body than needed. Nothing galled, nothing whined, nothing fought. The room had been taught its responsibilities, and now behaved with the polite certainty of a machine well-oiled and given a reason beyond itself. Ryder drew a breath and let it go slowly. The ache in his back told him he had carried the night honestly and would carry the day without complaint. It felt like the good kind of tired, the kind a body recognizes as payment and not debt. He looked to the crooked tree with its foil star. The star did not glitter now. It rested, small and thin, and exactly enough, the wrapped parcel under the lowest branch waited without urgency. A simple square tied in simple twine, patience folded into paper. He looked to Emma, who had made the two bears face the same direction before sleep, as if even toys should agree about where the heat was. Snow ticked at the far wall through brick and mortar, a sound that traveled as a feeling more than a note. Outside, the storm had lost its certainty, and now leaned toward a pause. Inside, certainty had been made by hand and by decision. Ryder went back to the pillar and slid down it until he sat with his boots flat and his knees easy. He let his hands rest on his thighs. He did not reach for any memory, not even the one with the pale tag that had once been a wound and was now only a mark, a sign with no authority left to command him. He had stood with it and not run. He had written a different tag and tied it to a different wrist, and left the second line blank because the room already knew how to sign the love. He tipped his head back and shut his eyes and let a few moments pass without inspection. The heater made its ribbon of sound. The clock kept measure a notch beneath it. He found the space between those two notes and sat there, listening for a third. When it arrived, it was not music. It was Emma's breath deepening and smoothing as a dream turned a corner without waking her. It was her mother's breath, answering a moment later, aligned by chance or kindness, and holding two steady lines, two pieces of proof that the night had done what needed doing. He opened his eyes and let them rest on the page he had written. He thought about the word fate and found he did not want it. Fate makes a man small and pulls him along by the collar, when the collar is precisely what he has been trying to unbuckle. Choice is harder and cleaner. Choice lets a man stand still until he knows which way to step, and then asks him to step that way. Even when his legs are not done shaking, he did not speak the word. He let it settle in his chest with the receipt and the sound of the heater and the measured tick of the clock. Choice, heavy and right. A brother passed through the far side of the room on soft feet, glanced at the cot, glanced at the mattress, and kept going like a man moving through a sanctuary that allows work. The door stayed quiet. The hinge stayed humble. Time walked past with a respectful pace. Ryder rose and stretched, and felt the bones of his back answer honestly. No complaint beyond the one that proves use. He crossed to the crate and lifted the glove. The receipt looked back at him in its humble square, not proud to be held, only ready to be kept. He smiled without showing teeth, a small private line that did not ask for witnesses. He set the glove down again, not to hide the paper, but to give it a roof, the way you give a birdhouse a little overhang, so rain cannot argue with the entrance. He checked the bolts because that had become part of the weather of this room. He checked the seal. He touched the edge of the plastic at the window and pressed it with a knuckle, the faint drum telling him the skin was still tight. He turned back and let his gaze travel one clean circle. Emblem to beam to star to gifts to bed to cot to crate to heater to clock. Every piece held. Outside, snow began to fall so lightly it looked like thought rather than weather. Inside, warmth held without effort. A single bulb above the tree made a tiny sound, a click almost too shy to hear, and brightened by the smallest shade, as if clearing its throat before a line it would never need to speak. Ryder listened. He heard the clock and the heater and two even breaths. He let those sounds sign their names on the day in ink no storm could wash out. Then he took his place by the pillar and allowed himself, at last, the ordinary sainthood of doing nothing. He stood as the last tall thing in the picture while smaller bodies slept, and he let the room keep what it had made. Snow softened to a breath over the city, not so much falling as settling, a slow, bright hush that made edges kinder. Inside the clubhouse, warmth held with the quiet stubbornness of a machine doing exactly what it was built to do. The heater spoke in a steady line. The clock answered with small, sure steps. The string of lights along the beam kept their dim watch, a row of patient eyes, choosing not to blink. Ryder rose from the pillar and let the room come into focus piece by piece. The way a mechanic brings an engine to life, by listening rather than forcing. Emma slept near the heater, scarf cupping her throat like a kept vow. The new bear lay under one arm with its tag tucked safe. The old bear leaned at her hip, its pale paw and clouded eye turned toward the warmth, as if learning the trick of belonging again. Her mother dozed on the cot, breath even and ordinary. That best of sounds, between the two of them, the air found a rhythm and stayed with it. Ryder crossed to the plastic window and laid a knuckle to the clear skin they had stapled last night. The faint drum said seal. He pressed the rubber lip at the bay door and felt it spring back into duty. A lamp clicked obediently beneath his thumb and held its low pool of light without glare. He moved on, adjusting a towel at the threshold, turning the crate a finger's width so a reaching hand would not strain. None of it was grand. All of it mattered. On the crate, his glove lay where he had left it, a dark roof over a small square of proof. He lifted the leather and touched the folded paper with 2 fingers, feeling the faint give it had learned against his chest. Not triumph, not absolution, a seal he could carry. He slid it back into the jacket, and the leather settled around the fact like a well-made holster around a tool that knows its job. He brought down a pad of thick paper and a pencil stubborn to the last inch and set them on the crate. He wrote the date in words because he was done letting numbers order him around. He drew a small line and started a ledger that did not care for totals. 1 warm room, 1 steady heater, 1 child sleeping without fear, 1 mother breathing easier. He read the lines once in his head to hear how they sat inside the space. Then he spread his palm across the page and pressed as if ink could be taught to live in wood. Emma stirred at the edge of the blanket and opened her eyes into morning without the flinch she had given tonight. She found the beam and the crooked string of bulbs, the foil star at rest, the little parcel still patient at the tree. And then she found Ryder. Her face said she remembered which world this was. The mother woke next, the cough arriving late and leaving early, like an old boss learning new rules. Ryder warmed water, set oats to thicken, coaxed the kettle into a slow talk. The room filled with a kind of quiet that made the day feel possible. They ate without hurry. Steam lifted and flattened and lifted again from the bowls. Mugs met wood with small, faithful sounds. Nothing asked to be bigger than it was. When the dishes were rinsed, Ryder looked back to the page. He added a line in the same clear hand. 1 plan inside a paper bag. 1 parcel opened with steady hands. He pressed his palm again, and the crate seemed to accept the weight of it. Work called from beyond the brick. He answered it with the same plain voice that had carried them through the night. He told Emma to keep the scarf. She nodded like a new soldier, learning good orders. He told the mother they would move steady. Her tired smile granted permission and dignity at once. The door rolled up, and he stepped into the weather first, so it would break on him before touching smaller bodies. The brothers fell into their quiet grammar. Keys lifted. A latch took a friendly slap. The van argued and then agreed to start. Heat made its case inside thin metal walls and began to win. Streets offered their useful lines, sanded by snow. Storefronts practiced being open. Tires sewed the blocks in a soft pattern. At the clinic, the air smelled of cleanser and deliberate mercy. A nurse spoke doses and times like a song. Even a bruised day could learn. Paper whispered through a printer and dropped into a tray with a clack of small authority. A stamp struck, and bloomed dark on the corner of a form like a flower committing to soil. Ryder watched and let the rituals do their good work. He paid what could be paid and did not posture about the rest. Back at the clubhouse, Heat walked out to meet them. The men who had stayed had not wasted a minute. The cot had squared corners, and a folded towel with a bar of soap perched like a solemn bird. A basin weighted with warm water, reflecting a steady bulb. A lamp found the exact spot a hand would reach for in the dark. The parcel under the tree no longer needed to prove anything, still offered its patient promise. Ryder helped the mother to the cot and set the small pharmacy bag on the crate. She took a tablet with the relief of someone whose body had finally been invited to participate in its own rescue. He placed the cup where it could be found without thought and stepped away so the act would belong to her. Emma moved in a small orbit that mapped safety with touch. She ran a finger along the twine on the parcel and let it hum once more before opening the paper with careful hands. The truck rolled true enough. She tested its wheels across the floor, a hush from heater to cot and back again, leaving behind a path made of sound and acceptance. She opened the board book next, tracing a word with a finger in the private way of a prayer not meant for other ears. She set the book on the crate and seated both bears on her thighs. Their faces turned toward the heater and toward each other, like old friends shown to a better table. The mother slept, not deep, but stitching sleep, the kind that sews edges together. Ryder checked the plastic skin at the window once more, and the rubber lip at the door. Not out of anxiety, but out of respect, he lowered the lamp a notch. He laid a second blanket at the foot of the cot, so a foot could find it without bargaining. He returned to the crate and added a line, one door that opens when asked and closes without stealing heat. He pressed his palm to the page again. The ritual did not grow old. It became the floor. The day lengthened by honest inches. A hinge accepted oil and retired its complaint. A plug seated with one honest push and surrendered its sparks. The heater kept its single note. The beam clicked now and then, as if clearing a small throat. Emma drove the little truck in slow parades under the low table and back. Both bears taking the tour, paws hooked over the bed, inspecting the room they had been given. She parked by the cot and set them like guards at the edge of warmth. Then she looked to Ryder and held his gaze for the measure of one heartbeat. "Good," he said, and the word carried the weight of a mechanic, signing off on a machine that will run all winter. Afternoon softened toward evening. Snow outside had the look of thought rather than weather. Inside, air and light made a treaty, and kept it. Ryder lifted his glove and checked the folded paper, then set the glove back with the care a man gives a tile on a roof he intends to trust. He closed the pad and slid it slightly under the crate lip, not to hide the words, only to let them rest. He stood with one palm on the pillar and let his gaze travel the circle of the room. The emblem on the wall presided without swagger. The crooked tree did its quiet duty. The foil star, done with dazzling, had learned the better work of belonging. Two bodies slept toward health. A child played toward trust. Men moved with competent hands and quiet feet around all that, and would continue to do so without being told. The door would open when asked and close again without negotiating away warmth. Ryder let his eyes fall to the scarf, folded by the small bed, a dark loop that had been a biker's garment yesterday and was a border of heat today. He did not speak to it. He read it the way a worker reads his own fingerprints on a finished job. He checked the bolt, checked the cord at the heater, checked the window skin once more. The promise lived where his hands lived. He did not call any of it fate. He called it choice, and let the words sit heavy and right beside the folded proof against his chest. He let it rest there with the hum of the heater and the tick of the clock and the soft sound of 2 even breaths. He stood, the last tall thing in the picture, while smaller bodies slept, and he let the room keep what it had made. Snow softened into background, a hush rather than a demand, a pale sift over brick that asked nothing of the room where heat held steady. Inside the clubhouse, the heater kept its low, unbroken line, the clock answered with small certain steps, and the string of lights along the beam watched without blinking. Ryder stood by the pillar and let those sounds fix their pace inside his ribs, a rhythm he could march a day by. Emma sat cross-legged near the heater, scarf cupping her throat like a kept vow. The new bear leaned against her side. The old bear faced the heat with its clouded eye as if learning to belong again. Her mother rested on the cot, breath even and ordinary, a sound that meant the worst had been made to wait outside. On the crate, a mug sent up a thin curl of steam. Beneath the woodlip, the pad with the ledger showed a neat edge. Patient as a tool put down between uses, Ryder lifted his glove, touched the folded proof with 2 fingers, then slid it back to his chest where leather kept it close. He checked the plastic skin they had stapled over the window and listened to the faint drum that says, "Seal." He pressed the rubber lip at the bay door with the toe of his boot and felt it spring back into duty. He dimmed the lamp 1 notch so the room would choose calm over glare. He moved through the space until the space answered in the only language that mattered. Nothing rattled. He poured warm water, not hot, and set it within the mother's reach. "We go steady," he said. She answered with a small nod that wore the shape of a salute. Emma rose with the alert ease of a child who has slept near safety and means to keep pace with it. Ryder looked to the brothers. Keys came off a hook without clatter. A door latch took a friendly slap. A crate of blankets rode a shoulder. No calls for attention, just motion. The door rolled up on a breath. Cold leaned in, not bold, just present. Ryder took it first with his jacket and left a corridor of softer air behind him. They climbed into the van. The engine complained, reconsidered, agreed. Heat pushed into thin metal and began to win its case. Streets offered their useful lines sanded by snow. Storefronts exhaled into light. Tires sewed a low, even stitch along the blocks. The clinic knew them now the way good rooms know need. Paper whispered, "A Stampstruck." Ink bloomed and dried along a corner. A wristband released its hold, with the snug insistence of something that had done its job and would not be needed again today. A nurse spoke in a rhythm even a tired mind could track. Ryder watched the steps land in order and did not hover or withdraw. He held the edge of the frame so help could move through the middle. Relief had to lead to something with legs. A roof that was not a car, heat not borrowed by the hour. A door that locked from the inside. Ryder turned the van toward an outreach office known by reputation among people who do not waste compliments. Brick, stubborn windows, a lobby where old chairs kept their dignity by refusing to squeak. At the counter, a man in a collared shirt gathered the word policy in his mouth, like a blade he meant to show. He pointed at a laminated sheet no one wanted to read. He tapped a sign in a voice too loud for a room where a child held a bear. Overreach leaned forward in his posture. Ryder did not raise his voice. He slid the discharge page across the counter and set his forefinger on the fresh stamp. Clean edges. Date plain. Signature. Steady. He set the pharmacy bag beside it. Label outward because clarity is a force. He added the weight of his hand flat to the paper. The way you still a rattling sheet of metal before you drill it true. "We have a sick mother," he said, "warm now and medicated, ready for intake. We have a child who has slept without fear for 1 night and needs to keep that streak. We need your room with a door and a working heater. He did not ask whether the building wanted to be a building. He told it how. The collared man reached for indignation and came up with air. A door to the back opened at the speed mercy uses when it recognizes itself. A woman stepped forward, measuring without performance. She took in the stamp, the label, the way Ryder stood, the set of Emma's chin, the calm on the mother's mouth. She did not read the laminated sheet. She read the room like a captain reads a deck and names the weather. "Here," she said, and the counter became a desk. Forms appeared that had been written by someone who had learned not to make survival too complicated. Names went down in plain letters. No one lied about addresses that had been steering wheels. A pen scratched an honest scratch. A key landed on wood with modest ceremony. The collared man found an alternate task 3 steps to the left and performed it quietly. They climbed a stair that had carried years of feet. Hall light hummed at a pitch that meant the ballast still had patience. The key turned. The door opened. Inside, an honest square of room. 2 beds with frames that had known both sorrow and sleep. A radiator that ticked like a reluctant metronome, and then remembered how to be warm. A window that offered brick and a slice of sky, not mercy dressed as spectacle. Enough. Emma entered with the small hush children bring to places they decide to respect. She walked the baseboard with the side of her shoe and tested for drafts. A habit trained by hard nights, she set the old bear on the nearer bed and the new bear beside it, then changed her mind and seated them together like partners on the pillow. Her mother stood a breath behind and let her eyes land in a life she had not dared to want long enough to miss. Ryder checked the radiator valve with 2 fingers, listened to the water move behind iron, pressed the window sash, and wedged a folded card under the frame until the tug of cold lost interest. He set the pharmacy bag on the dresser, where habit would find it. He placed the card with numbers the woman had written under the lamp base so it would not wander. He named the next hour instead of making a speech. Sheets from the desk. A kettle. What they need that is not on any list. He set a folded stack of bills on the dresser. Not a bribe. Not goodbye. Just bridge money with a job. He pointed to the phone mounted near the door, its receiver heavy enough to mean business. "This calls the desk," he said. "This calls the street. This calls me." He wrote his number in block letters and taped it beside the phone where a hand could find it without asking memory to help. A light knock at the open door. The woman from the desk stood with linens, a kettle, a bag that added dignity in practical ways. She did not list contents as if teaching a class. She set them down where they belonged, with the ease of someone who has practiced belonging. She glanced at Ryder's jacket, where a patch might have named him, and did not flinch. She lowered her voice a half step for Emma, without announcing her kindness. "Welcome," she said, and meant it as an action. They made the beds together. Cotton snapped the air, sharp and clean. A sound that ends small wars inside people. The kettle found its place. A cup steamed on the sill. The radiator admitted it had more in it than it let on at first. Emma turned the faucet to test the water and shut it off with approval. "There is a clinic at the far end of this floor," Ryder said to the mother, "open certain hours, with a nurse on call in the other hours. We will run what you need until your feet are steady." He did not say promise. He had been writing promise in actions since the first scarf around a small neck. Words would only have to catch up. The man from the counter drifted by with a folder and tried a different tone. Apology braided with bureaucracy. He started to say policy and tripped on his own echo. The woman gave him a look that could have kept weather out of a ship hatch and sent him away to staple in peace. Overreach met a quiet wall of competence. and learned something without being told. That was enough justice for a hallway. When beds and paper and water and heat had taken their places, the room breathed with them. Emma set both bears sitting up like witnesses to a story that would not need to shout to be true. Her mother sat and held the cup with both hands and let steam touch her face like a hand that does not take. Ryder stood a step away and took the inventory a man takes when he means to leave and to stay. He went to the window and looked at the slice of sky, a pale promise edging past gray. He checked the latch again because his hands had learned to keep checking the same few things, and those few things kept saying yes. He set his palm on the radiator and felt the small bite of warmth, nodded once like a mechanic in a good shop, speaking approval to honest work. He turned back. "I will be downstairs for a while," he said. "If you need anything, call." He tapped the paper by the phone where his name sat in block letters that did not apologize for their shape. He left without ceremony, because ceremony would have taken up space better, left for breath. At the desk he signed nothing he could not keep. The woman nodded the way people nod when they have decided to work with you again. The collared man stapled where he was told, and discovered a quiet relief in doing the kind of job that does not bruise anyone. The hall kept its steady hum. Ryder stepped into the street. Snow forgot itself to almost nothing. The city showed its lines. He rolled his shoulders and felt the jacket accept him. The van gave him back a version of his face he could live with. He drove toward the clubhouse through streets that had remembered their purpose. The heater made the cabin honest. Inside, warmth met him like a shift, resuming. The string of lights kept their calm watch. The ledger waited where he had left it. As faithful as a wrench cleaned and set in its drawer, he set the keys on the hook in their usual arc. He lifted his glove, checked the folded proof, and put it back. He pulled the pad free and wrote a last line in the same clear hand. One door with a lock inside, one bed with clean corners, one radiator that remembered how. He pressed his palm to the page until the wood understood. He looked at the emblem on the wall and did not ask it for permission. He looked at the place where the small bed had been and saw a station along a line rather than an end. He looked at the heater and listened to its steady work. He did not call the day a miracle. He called it the consequence of choice, repeated until it grows muscle and posture. He let that word rest beside the folded proof at his chest, beside the hum and the tick that signed their names on the room. Then he took his place by the pillar, the last tall thing in the picture, and kept the watch, while the new order he had set in motion learned to stand on its own. Snow eased into the city like a tired breath, not falling so much as settling, a pale hush that forgot to argue. Cold stood outside the door with its hands in its pockets, like a worker at the end of a shift watching the last hour finish itself. Inside the clubhouse, warmth held a steady line. The heater hummed its patient note. The clock answered in small, exact steps that felt honest. The string of lights along the beam kept their quiet watch, small eyes that did not need to blink. Ryder came off the pillar and rolled his shoulders, the way a man unrolls a map he already knows. The room greeted him in the language the last days had taught. Tape held. The plastic skin at the window drummed back a soft assurance when he tapped it with a knuckle. The inner tube seal along the bay door sprang true under his boot. Nothing rattled, nothing begged. Everything waited and worked. He set water to heat and poured it into the dented kettle on the hot plate. Steam rose with the sound of calm instruction. Oats went into a pan and thickened without showing off. He lined 3 mugs on the crate out of habit, then gathered them again because habit was the point and the comfort both. He tasted coffee, cut with hot water, until it landed like a road he intended to travel, not one he was trying to escape. He let the steam find his face, and then go about its business. On the crate, his glove sat like a roof over a small house of fact. He lifted the leather and touched the folded proof with 2 fingers, a square softened by warmth and kept by choice, not fear. It felt like an old scar that no longer wrote his story, and still spoke when the weather changed. He slid it back inside the jacket, where leather held it the way a good holster holds a tool trusted to do one job well. He did not need to check the lines on the paper. He knew what they said. He knew why he carried them. The crooked tree at the wall had grown quiet pride. The foil star did not try to glitter anymore. It belonged. The floor kept only the memory of the small bed, an indentation lifted by time and heat, and the decision to stand somewhere else. He smiled at that, a small line that took the corner of his mouth and asked nothing from anyone. He shouldered a sack he had packed before dawn because steady days begin earlier than storms, a soft sweatshirt for a small body, wool socks ready to handle winter without flinching, a board book with heavy pages that forgave rough hands. He looked at the hook by the door. The van keys waited like the right size socket in a tidy drawer. He took them, and the door rolled up on a hinge that had learned to behave. Cold broke on him first. He left a corridor of warmer air behind. The city had settled into its useful lines. Plows had carved lanes that made sense. Storefronts yawned and straightened. Faces moved behind glass, with the intent of people who have tasks worthy of their time. The van agreed to start without argument, and let heat push its case through thin metal until the cabin learned comfort again. The outreach building held its brick like a statement of fact. Stairs remembered how feet move when purpose leads them. The hall light hummed that ballast hymn of places that keep their promises. Ryder lifted his hand and then paused to listen. A low voice, a soft laugh that tried to hide and failed, because joy is terrible at stealth. He knocked anyway, a quiet sound that introduced his size to the frame before his face did the rest. The door opened enough. The mother stood with a blanket over her shoulders and a color in her cheek that the night had not been allowed to keep. She gave him the tired pride of someone who has fought her way back to a place where gratitude does not cost dignity. "Steady day," he said. She nodded. "Steady day." Emma leaned from behind the door, both bears tucked under one arm, like two truths that do not cancel. The old bear kept its clouded eye on him with lively suspicion. The new bear behaved, its clean tag, quiet as a good witness. The scarf nested at her throat, not just cloth now, but a circle that had closed and meant to stay closed. She looked at him without a test, only a check that the same rules still held. He kept his face clear and present, so she would not have to guess. "I brought a few things that might fit," he said. No ceremony. He handed over the sack. She took it like a careful mechanic, accepts a part across a fender, measuring weight before counting anything. The sweatshirt came out. She pressed the inside of the cuff to her cheek, testing temperature, the way people who have earned warmth do. The socks followed. She slipped one over her hand and flexed her fingers inside the wool, then set both in a neat pair as if putting order into the room. The book came last. She ran her thumb along the foredge, so the pages fanned with a soft rush, and then settled, as if giving permission for a future to arrange itself. Ryder set the kettle on the radiator ledge and watched steam rise in a slow ribbon. The radiator ticked a little, then remembered what heat is supposed to do. Outside the window, snow practiced falling without deciding to make a scene. The room smelled of soap and cotton and something else that only appears after doors learn to lock from the inside. He pointed his chin toward the phone. "Number holds," he said. The mother tapped the taped paper with one finger and gave him a look that said the message had already moved from paper to muscle. He did not talk about fate. He looked at the window latch, and pressed the frame where cold had tried to sneak in yesterday. The card he had wedged held the line. He opened the cupboard under the sink and read the contents like a parts drawer. Soap, towels, 2 cups, a spare bulb taped inside a paper sleeve. Enough. He spoke the next hour instead of making promises. Sheets from the desk if more are needed, a kettle that would find a better spot by the sill, a walk for fresh air when weather stopped pretending to test them. The mother nodded, not as permission, but as an equal accepting a plan. She had a right to shape. Emma set both bears on the nearest pillow like elders at a meeting. She touched the old paw tag with a fingertip, and then the new tag with the same care, aligning names that now lived side by side. She did not ask him to explain the difference. He did not make her. In the hall, the building went about its business with the decent hush of a crew that has the right tools, a soft knock somewhere, a kettle beginning to work, a cough that no longer sounded like an argument. The place held its posture. When he left, he did not say farewell. He set his palm on the doorframe as he passed, the way a man signs his name with heat instead of ink. Down the stairs, through a lobby that nodded back without ceremony, out into a street that had remembered how to be itself. The van started on the first try, as if the morning had been rehearsed. He drove through lanes that had been cut clean. He returned to the clubhouse that had decided to be more than the loud room it had once been. The door accepted his key and rolled up like a shoulder shrug that had learned manners. Warmth met him without question. The heater kept its note. The beam clicked once, a tiny throat, clearing before silence. The string of lights stayed loyal to their quiet duty. He hung the keys on their hook. The way a man closes a circuit, he placed the empty sack on its peg. Emptiness now, meaning a job completed instead of a lack. He lifted his glove, touched the folded proof, and let the old scar speak its soft, weathered truth. Then he slid the glove back over the small house of fact. The ledger page waited under the crate lip, patient as a clean wrench. He pulled it forward and set a steady line beneath the others. One child, reading in a room that locks from inside. The pencil made its honest scratch. He pressed his palm until the paper learned the wood again. He breathed out and listened to the heater answer, with the same steady patience. A call and response of work that means to last. He walked the space like a man checks a fence line after wind has tried and failed. A hinge accepted a single drop of oil and retired its complaint. The roll-up door shook once and then decided not to rattle. The extension cord wanted coiling, and he coiled it in an easy loop and hung it on a nail hammered straight. The chrome on a small part did not need to shine. He wiped it anyway. Pride without announcement is the cleanest kind. He sat on the crate and let his hands hang between his knees. He pictured steam on a distant window curling into shapes that meant breath and not trouble. He pictured 2 bears seated like witnesses and a small finger, tracing a word without fear that anyone would stop her. He pictured the scarf doing its simple duty, and the mother lifting a cup without asking permission from the cold first. He let those images stand inside his chest, like quiet posts, holding up a roof. He rose and laid his palm against the pillar, leaning his weight into a frame that no longer pinched him. He listened to the heater and the clock answer each other in steady syllables. He felt the folded proof at his chest, not heavy, not light, exact. He looked at the emblem on the wall and did not ask it for permission. He looked at the heater and let its hum be the only sermon the room required. He looked at the crooked tree and the foil star and saw not the end of anything, only a tool that would be used when needed, and then set down again with respect. He did not call the quiet luck. He named it what it was: work chosen, repeated, and held. The room answered with the right kind of silence, the proud kind. Snow outside forgot to fall. Inside, Warmth kept singing one clean line. Ryder kept the watch without hurry, the last tall shape in the picture, while smaller lives did their steady work of belonging. At its heart, this story reminds us that redemption doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It grows quietly through the choices we make when no one is watching. Ryder's journey teaches that healing from guilt or injustice isn't about erasing the past, but about turning pain into purpose. Life gives everyone a scar or two. What defines us is whether we let those scars harden into excuses or soften into empathy. Real strength, as Americans often say, isn't in standing tall, it's in standing back up. In a world that too often rewards silence or cynicism, the act of choosing kindness, of showing up again and again for others, becomes a quiet form of rebellion. The story also speaks to those who've been silenced by loss, prejudice, or fear. Your worth is not measured by what broke you, but by how you keep building anyway. Fairness isn't something given by the system, it's something reclaimed, one steady act at a time. Like the saying goes, you can't control the wind, but you can adjust the sails. Ryder adjusted his, and through that choice found peace, not as a reward, but as a responsibility. If this story moved you, share what it stirred in you. Have you ever turned a painful truth into an act of quiet courage? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Like this video if it spoke to you, and subscribe for more stories that look deeply at justice, compassion, and what it means to keep faith in humanity. Until next time, may your days find warmth in small acts of grace, and may the noise of the world never drown out your own good heart.